Hi, 8th grade. This is video 1 of lesson 8-6, solving rational equations and inequalities. We are going to spend 2 days on this lesson. We're actually going to skip inequalities altogether and guided practice 6. If you want to, you can go look at those in your online textbook for some enrichment. Day 1, we're just going to look at solving the equations and get comfortable with that process. And then day 2, we'll look at word problems. So rational equation, just like all different types of functions, a rational equation is specific to rational functions, so it contains one or more rational expressions. They're often easier to solve by eliminating the denominator by multiplying each side by the LCD. So you can actually clear your fractions, which we've done in multiple different chapters throughout the year. So we'll use that approach today. There are going to be some problems, though, where there might be a faster approach, like guided practice 1. Guided practice 1, if you notice, we do have 2 fractions on the left and 1 on the right. However, only one of the fractions contains a variable. These other 2 fractions, if I move 3/2 to the other side and by subtraction, we can combine like terms and I'm going to end up with a proportion. So anytime you have multiple fractions in a rational equation, but you can move one of the terms to the other side and combine like terms, you can set up a proportion and it ends up being, most likely end up being less work. You might disagree once we do some of these lengthier problems with clearing fractions, and you might decide to do that in all of them. But we're going to approach guided practice 1 as proportions. So like I said, I'm going to subtract 3/2, so 19/10 minus 3/2. If you're not using a calculator, don't forget your common denominators. If you are using a calculator, keep everything converted to a fraction so that there's no rounding issues. So you end up with 2/5. Now we cross multiply. We've got x plus 3 times 2. Don't forget your parentheses so that you distribute correctly. And we've got 2 times 5. But what I'm seeing here is if I'm multiplying them both by 2, I can actually just divide 2 from both sides. And I'm just left with x plus 3 equals 5. If you don't notice that right away, that's okay. You would just end up with 2x plus 6 because you would distribute, and 10 on the right-hand side by multiplying, and you'd end up with the same answer. Okay, so either approach works, but what you might notice about a proportion is if the numerators are the same, the denominators also have to be the same. So we could jump straight to this step here. So there's a lot of shortcuts we could take on this problem. Now, not all those problems on this lesson are going to work that way, but this first one does nicely. But again, we can just cross multiply, distribute, simplify, and solve. But if anytime you notice a shortcut, it might be worth taking. Okay, so let's take a look at another one. Here, again, we have 3 fractions. Only one has a variable. The other 2 are just numerical fractions. So we could take this 7/12 and subtract it to the other side. Okay, we end up with 9/16. Again, shortcut. Our numerators and numerators are the same, just like in this one up here. So if 9 equals 9, then x minus 4 has to equal 16, and we can solve. Or if that doesn't work out, because it won't always work out, you need common denominators. So for example, if we end up with something like 3 over x plus 4 equals 7 over 12, we can't do that shortcut approach. We'd have to do cross multiplication. We'd simplify, and we'd solve. Okay? Oh, sorry, there we go. And we would solve. So those first 2 do work out real nicely with shortcuts, and I like to start with those because we want to train ourselves to look for shortcuts whenever we can, not just to make it faster and easier, but that's just a good math skill to be able to recognize that. And our note here, I've already said, if multiple terms contain a variable, rewriting as proportion could be a lot of work. Instead, factor if needed. That's a common strategy we're using in every lesson this chapter. Then clear fractions. So we're not going to be able to do this simple of an approach for these next few examples. I have another note on the next page for you. Watch out for extraneous solutions. Your solutions cannot give 0 in the denominator, so we want to make sure we check for that. So that's where I'm going to stop this first video. Augie's waking up, so I'm going to check on him. Okay.